You will not believe what happens to the girl at the end. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue writing stories like this one. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
The whining in the wind. The wind shrieked, a feral beast hammering at the double-bar ranch's sturdy logs. Icy granules, driven with the force of flung pebbles, coated the window panes, dimming the weak light seeping into the cabin. Dusty Rivers, huddled near the hearth, felt the fire's warmth struggle against the deep freeze that had burrowed into his bones. He'd twice made the rounds, ensuring the livestock were well-provisioned against the tempest. Now, captive to the storm's whim, the cabin's stillness only amplified the howling outside. Even Rusty, normally a bounding ball of energy, paced with unease. His claws clicked a nervous rhythm on the wood floor as a low, guttural whine vibrated in his chest. He pressed his cold nose into Dusty's hand, then trotted to the door, scratching insistently. "Settle down, boy," Dusty murmured, stroking the dog's ears. "Just a squall. Nothing out there but ice and air." But Rusty remained unconvinced, his whine rising in pitch, a keen note cutting through the blizzard's roar. He scraped at the door with renewed fervor, a slight tremor running through his frame. Dusty sighed. He knew this dog. Casual bad weather never ruffled Rusty's fur. Something tangible was amiss. All right, Dusty relented, rising to his feet. "We'll have a look. But if all this fuss is over a snowshoe hare, you're sleeping in the barn tonight." He shrugged into his thick coat, his clumsy fingers struggling with the closures. Snatching his Stetson from its peg, he pulled it low against the glare. The gale assaulted him the instant he cracked the door, a frigid fist punching him in the face. Snow spun in a dizzying vortex, obliterating all visibility. Rusty, sensing his chance, squeezed past Dusty and plunged into the tempest. "Rusty, get back here!" Dusty shouted, his words devoured by the wind's hungry maw. He hesitated a moment, then plunged after him into the blinding whiteout. The wind clawed at his exposed skin, stealing his breath. He could barely make out the shape of the ranch house, once a reassuring landmark, now just a fuzzy shadow behind him. "Rusty!" He bellowed again, but only the wind answered. A tendril of fear snaked through him. This was reckless. He should retreat. But the image of Rusty, lost and vulnerable, spurred him onward. He trusted the dog's instincts, they had served him well in the past. He slogged through the mounting drifts, each step a labor. The wind seemed to buffet him from every angle, robbing him of all sense of direction. He peered through slitted eyes, fighting the sting of the icy air. Then, a flicker. A dim shape, a darker shade against the unrelenting white, materialized in the distance. It was Rusty, darting back and forth, his tail a frantic flag. He barked, a sharp yap that vanished instantly on the wind. Dusty followed, his heart hammering against his ribs. What had the dog discovered? He prayed it wasn't a break in the fence or a wandering calf, something that could wait until the storm abated. Rusty led him to a small knoll sculpted by the wind into a frozen wave. The dog was frantically digging at something buried beneath the snow, his whines urgent and insistent. Dusty knelt, the snow swallowing his knees. He swept aside the loose powder, his fingers rapidly losing feeling. Then he struck something firm, something yielding under the icy crust. He clawed at the snow with frantic energy, his breath catching in ragged gasps. The snow relinquished its hold, revealing a patch of dark cloth. More frantic digging, and then he saw it. A face. Pale and still, half submerged in the snow. A woman. The blood drained from his face. He reached out a trembling hand and brushed her cheek. It felt like touching death itself. She was alive, he registered dimly, hanging by a thread. He had to get her back to the warmth of the cabin. Now. Lifting her was a monumental effort. She possessed a surprising weight, and the wind threatened to snatch her away. Rusty, understanding the gravity of the situation, nudged her with his nose as if trying to assist. Dusty lurched back toward the ranch house, his muscles screaming in protest. The wind battered him relentlessly, trying to drag him back into the heart of the storm. He kept his gaze fixed on the ground, focusing on the agonizing rhythm of one foot after the other, his arms a vice around the woman's frozen form. He knew nothing about her, how she had come to be stranded in this deadly expanse. But one thing resonated with bone-deep certainty: finding her, here, amidst this ferocious storm, was no chance encounter. A hand in the snow. The fire snapped, its bold orange defiance a stark contrast to the icy fingers pressing against the panes. Dusty stroked Rusty's head, the dog's coat stubbornly damp despite their indoor refuge. But Rusty remained agitated. A low growl rumbled in his chest, vibrating up through the soles of Dusty's boots. He traversed the space between the hearth and the door, scratching at the wood with a frantic persistence that defied the cabin's warmth. "Settle down, boy," Dusty murmured, the gale swallowing his words whole. He understood Rusty. Normally, the dog was unfazed even by such weather. Something was amiss, a primal unease stirring deep within him. Finally, Dusty yielded. He shrugged into his heavy coat, its familiar weight a meager reassurance against the dread tightening his gut. He claimed his hat and gloves, the leather brittle with the cold's bite. "All right, Rusty," he conceded, nudging the door open a sliver. "But a quick one, and heal." The blizzard slammed into him like a solid object. Snow whirled in a disorienting ballet. The wind howled, a ravenous beast clawing at his garments, stealing his breath. Squinting, he struggled to discern the barn, barely 20 yards distant, yet swallowed by the white inferno. Rusty, already halfway across the porch, plunged into the tempest, his dark silhouette vanishing almost instantly. "Rusty!" Dusty bellowed, his cry consumed by the tempestuous air. Hesitation flickered, then he succumbed, wading into the swirling chaos. The snow was deceptive in its depth, almost knee-high in places. Each advance was a labored effort, a grueling test. Head bowed, he tracked Rusty's path as best he could, the dog's prints rapidly disappearing beneath the ceaseless fall. Rusty surged forward with manic energy, nose glued to the ground, charting a course through the drifts. He moved with purpose, following an unseen beacon. Dusty struggled to maintain contact, his lungs burning, his muscles protesting with each stride. The wind lashed at him, threatening to topple him into the frozen embrace. He stumbled precariously, catching himself just in time, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. They ventured farther, the welcoming beacon of the cabin's windows dimming in their wake. Doubt not at Dusty's resolve. He should have remained inside. He should have trusted his own instincts, not the whim of an animal. But then Rusty halted. The dog stood at the base of a massive drift, barking hysterically, a shrill, desperate cry piercing the storm's roar. He was excavating, his paws a blur, flinging snow in all directions. "What is it, boy?" Dusty shouted, his voice a mere whisper against the wind's symphony. He trudged through the suffocating snow, his legs heavy with exhaustion. Drawing closer, he registered what Rusty had unearthed. A hand. A pallid, slender hand adorned with a delicate, lace-trimmed glove jutted from the icy tomb. The lace was tattered and worn, the fabric marred by melting snow. The hand was motionless, unnervingly so. Dusty's breath hitched. He sank to his knees, the cold permeating his clothing. Trembling, he reached out a gloved hand, gently clearing the snow from the exposed wrist. The skin was frigid, like carved marble. He dug with renewed fervor, his hands working with frantic speed, oblivious to the stinging snow and the wind's cruel bite. He uncovered an arm, then a shoulder, and finally a head. Dark hair, plastered with snow and ice, framed a face drained of color and life. A young woman. Her eyes were sealed shut, her lips cracked and blue. Her skin possessed an almost ethereal translucence akin to porcelain. She was clad in a flimsy woolen coat, woefully inadequate against the brutal elements. A surge of adrenaline coursed through Dusty, a primal fear intertwined with a desperate resolve. She clung precariously to life's edge. He neither recognized her nor understood her presence here, but one imperative resonated within him: he must return her to the cabin. He must restore her warmth. He must save her. Race against the freeze. The snow lashed Dusty's face, each flake a shard of ice. He blinked, fighting to keep the woman's spectral form in view. Rusty, a worried shadow, paced a tight circle, his tail clamped down, a low, guttural whine rumbling in his chest. Kneeling, Dusty cleared the snow plastered to her skin. A young woman, deathly pale, her lips stained in alarming blue. He sought a pulse in the hollow of her throat. A faint tremor, a ghostly echo against frigid flesh. Blast it all, Dusty cursed, his breath pluming white in the sub-zero air. Time, he knew with chilling certainty, was the enemy. Leaving her wasn't an option. He gathered her up, surprised by her weightlessness. She felt like a fledgling wren, all bone and vulnerable frame. The blizzard redoubled its assault, the wind a keening harpy, pelting his eyes with snow, blurring the world into a chaotic white void. "Hang tight, girl," he grunted, adjusting his grip. Rusty yipped, a sharp command. Dusty lurched forward, each step a brutal negotiation with the deepening drifts. The ranch, a half-mile eternity away, felt an impossible dream in this frozen hellcape. He locked onto the faint, hazy glow of the cabin window, a fragile promise in the swirling gloom. He had to reach that light. He stumbled, nearly pitching forward, but recovered. The woman stirred in his arms, a faint, swallowed moan. He tightened his hold, his muscles screaming in protest. "Easy now," he rasped, knowing she couldn't register his words. Almost there. The gale clawed at any exposed inch. Ice frosted Dusty's beard, his fingers numbed despite the thick gloves. The cold seeped into him, a creeping paralysis that threatened to shut him down. He pressed onward, driven by a raw, instinctive will to safeguard the fragile life he carried. Rusty darted ahead, then back, his anxious barks a relentless prod. Even the dog, usually a dynamo of energy, seemed diminished by the storm's ferocity. The ground bucked and swayed beneath the concealing snow. His muscles burned, his lungs shrieked for respite. He focused on the simple act of planting one foot ahead of the other, a mantra against the encroaching pain, the biting cold, the gnawing fear. Keep moving. He risked a glance at her face. The pallor deepened, the blue more pronounced. He needed to thaw her quickly. The image of the crackling hearth, the heavy quilts piled high on the bed, flashed in his mind. He envisioned spooning warm broth past her lips, watching the color creep back into her cheeks. That vision fueled him, granting him the strength for another step and then another. The wind shrieked, the snow continued its relentless descent, but the cabin light seemed to amplify, to draw him in. He could practically feel the phantom warmth, a siren's call in the icy wilderness. At last, through the blinding curtain of white, he discerned the shadowy form of the barn, followed by the familiar, comforting silhouette of the cabin. He strained forward, his legs leaden, his arms ablaze with agony. Almost home. Summoning a final, desperate surge, he staggered onto the porch, kicking at the accumulating snow. Rusty erupted in joyous barks, pawing at the door. Dusty's stiff fingers wrestled with the latch, fumbling with the frozen metal. With a final, desperate shove, he wrenched the door open and lunged inside, collapsing onto the floor just beyond the threshold, the woman secured in his embrace. The abrupt heat of the cabin washed over him, almost unbearable after the brutal exposure. He lay there, gasping, his body quaking with exhaustion. He'd made it. But the fight was far from over, it had just begun. A flicker of life. The fire snarled, a defiant beacon against the wind's ravenous assault. Dusty knelt, his weathered hands surprisingly tender, liberating the woman from her icy cocoon of clothing. Her skin, exposed to the flickering orange light, possessed an unsettling pallor. Years battling stubborn livestock and patching fences in the merciless climate had honed his efficiency. He swathed her in thick, woolen blankets, usually reserved for the harshest nights. He massaged her frigid limbs, the frozen flesh slow to respond. They felt like sculptures carved from winter itself, unresponsive and brittle. A curse escaped his lips, a guttural murmur swallowed by the howling gale. He had to rekindle her inner warmth. Rusty, his dog, whined, nudging her hand with a damp nose. Dusty's gaze softened, offering a silent reassurance. "Easy boy," he rasped, his voice thick with worry. "She'll mend. We'll see to it." He retrieved a kettle, pouring steaming water into a basin. He wrung out a cloth and gently bathed her brow, each compress a silent plea against the encroaching death. Time dissolved, marked only by the fire's insatiable hunger and Dusty's tireless efforts to feed it. He coaxed warm broth past her unyielding lips with a spoon, each dribble a small defeat met with renewed persistence. He spoke to her, his voice a low vibration in the cramped space. He painted pictures of the ranch, the desolate beauty of long winters, Rusty's boundless devotion. He even recounted the old cowboy legend, the tale of a woman destined to arrive in the valley, breathing life back into the barren land. He knew it was fanciful, yet he clung to it like a lifeline tossed in a storm. As the hours passed, a faint rose tinted her cheeks. Her breathing, previously shallow and erratic, found a deeper rhythm. He continued his vigil, hope blossoming with each subtle improvement. Then, a shiver rippled through her form. Her eyelids fluttered. Dusty's breath hitched, his heart hammered against his ribs. Her eyes opened, the color of a glacial sky, a pale, piercing blue. They blinked, unfocused at first, then slowly sharpened, registering the fire, the cabin, and Dusty's etched concern. She tried to speak, managing only a dry, scratchy sound. "Easy," Dusty soothed, relief flooding his voice. "Don't strain yourself. Just rest." He offered another spoonful of broth, which she managed to swallow. Her gaze met his, a silent query hanging between them. He didn't know her name nor the circumstances that led her to the blizzard. He only knew she was alive, and for the moment that was enough. Suddenly, Rusty erupted in a sharp, insistent bark that shattered the fragile quiet. He pawed at the door with frantic energy. Dusty frowned, a knot forming in his stomach. Rusty never barked like that without dire cause. He placed a hand on the woman's forehead, noting the coolness of her skin, though less alarming than before. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice firm. "I'll be right back." He seized his rifle from the corner and cautiously pulled open the door. The blizzard's fury remained undiminished, a biting, stinging assault. A few feet away, Rusty was digging at something buried in the drifts. Dusty peered through the swirling snow, trying to decipher the object. As he drew closer, he recognized it. A small wooden box, half submerged. Exquisitely carved, its design stirred a distant memory. He knew with chilling certainty that the box held the answer to the woman's identity, to her presence in his valley. And he felt certain the answer held danger. He glanced back at the cabin, at the comforting glow in the window, at the woman slowly gathering strength. He would protect her, regardless of the box's contents. But as he reached for it, a strange sensation enveloped him, a chilling premonition mingled with an irresistible, almost magnetic pull. The box seemed to call to him, whispering promises of revelation, yet warning of dire consequences. He hesitated, his hand hovering above the snow-laden wood. The storm roared its defiance, an overwhelming cacophony that mirrored the turmoil in his soul. A look back at the cabin, then back at the box. He knew with devastating clarity that his life would never be the same again. Eyes of blue. The fire hissed, its meager warmth a defiant stand against the bone-deep cold that permeated the cabin. Dusty, his face a canvas of worry, kept vigil over the woman nestled deep within the blankets. Hours had dissolved as he'd nursed her back from the brink, spooning broth past her trembling lips, fighting the frost that clung to her. Now, the violent shaking had eased to a subtle tremor. Rusty, as if sensing the shift, bumped Dusty's leg with his snout, his dark eyes full of canine concern. A silent scratch behind the ears was Dusty's reply. "Settle down, boy," he rumbled. "Let her come around on her own time." Then, a sign. Eyelids, delicate as pressed flowers, fluttered. Dusty's breath hitched. Slowly, haltingly, they lifted, revealing irises the shade of a frozen lake, an astonishing, brilliant blue stark against her pallor. Her gaze swam, lost in a fog of disorientation. She blinked, her vision sweeping the room, briefly snagging on Dusty before flitting away, a spark of apprehension in their depths. A small sound, like a bird's, escaped her throat, almost lost to the keening wind. "Easy," Dusty soothed, his voice a low hum. He reached out, then thought better of it, retracting his hand. "You're safe. You're in my cabin." Her lips formed shapes, but no sound emerged. She swallowed, the movement evident in her slender neck. Where am I?" The question was a mere breath, barely audible above the storm's lament. "Wyoming," Dusty answered gently. "You were caught in the blizzard. I found you out there." He made a vague gesture toward the door, hesitant to conjure the image of her near demise. Her brow creased, a deeper bewilderment clouding those blue depths. "Wyoming? I don't understand." She gripped the blankets, her fingers bone white. "I don't remember." Dusty's stomach dropped. Amnesia. The one complication he didn't need. He needed answers, and now he was saddled with a woman who couldn't even recall her name. "Don't fret," he said, forcing a note of reassurance. "It's all right. Just rest. You've been through hell." He offered her water. With trembling hands, she accepted the cup, her gaze locked on him. She drank slowly, with evident gratitude, then closed her eyes as if summoning inner strength. "What's your name?" Dusty asked quietly, steeling himself for the response, or lack thereof. Her eyes flickered open, her gaze questioning. A slow shake of her head, a look of genuine distress etched on her face. I don't know." Dusty maintained his composure. "Okay, that's fine. We'll get through this. Can you recall anything at all? Anything before waking up here?" Her eyes squeezed shut, her brow furrowing in concentration. "Music," she breathed. "I hear music in my mind. A piano, maybe? And blossoms. I see blossoms. Purple ones." Her voice faded, frustration tightening her features. "But nothing else. Just snippets." Rusty offered a soft whine, nudging her hand with his wet nose. She glanced down at him, a faint smile gracing her lips. She tentatively stroked his fur. "He's a good boy," she whispered. "He is," Dusty agreed, a warmth blossoming within him despite the gravity of the situation. "He found you. He pulled you from the storm." An idea sparked within him. He needed to learn who she was, and if she couldn't tell him, perhaps the box could reveal something. But he couldn't leave her alone, not in her current state. "I need to step outside for a moment," he said. "Just to check on the livestock. Rusty will stay here. He'll keep you company." He hesitated, wanting to urge her to stay put, but the words felt redundant. Where else could she go? He pulled on his coat and hat, the frigid air clawing at his skin as he ventured into the swirling vortex of snow. He looked back at the cabin window, her silhouette visible against the firelight, Rusty's dark head resting on her lap. He needed answers. He trudged toward the barn. The box wasn't far. As he neared the barn door, a delicate sound drifted on the wind, a melody, fragile and tentative, emanating from the cabin. He stopped, listening intently. It was a piano piece, played with hesitant grace, but undeniably there. She was playing. How? He didn't own a piano. He pushed open the barn door, the wind howling around him. He had to find that box. He had to learn her identity. And he had to uncover the secrets she held. The wooden bird. The fire crackled, spitting defiance at the blizzard raging outside. Elara slept, her breathing shallow and even. Dusty, perched on the edge of his worn armchair, hadn't moved much since she drifted off. He couldn't shake the image of her, half buried, a fragile bloom against the unforgiving white. His gaze drifted to her hand resting on the worn quilt. Nestled within her fingers, he saw it, a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was no bigger than his thumb, crafted from a dark, dense wood he didn't recognize. The detail was remarkable, tiny feathers etched into the wings, a delicate beak slightly ajar as if mid-song. Where had it come from? Was it a trinket, a treasured memento? A wave of protectiveness washed over him, battling with a gnawing curiosity. He wanted to know everything about her, the music that haunted her dreams, the blossoms she remembered, the story behind the wooden bird. But he also feared what he might uncover. What if her past was something dangerous, something that would bring trouble to his doorstep? He rose silently, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. Rusty, curled at the foot of Elara's makeshift bed, lifted his head, his brown eyes questioning. Dusty placed a finger to his lips, then gestured towards the door. He needed to clear his head, to breathe the frigid air and try to make sense of the whirlwind his life had become. The storm hadn't abated. The wind howled like a banshee, driving the snow into swirling, blinding curtains. Visibility was near zero. He pulled his hat low over his eyes and stepped out, the cold instantly biting through his layers of clothing. Rusty, ever vigilant, stayed close, his nose twitching, sniffing the air. "Easy, boy," Dusty murmured, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Just a little walk." But Rusty wasn't interested in a casual stroll. He tugged at Dusty's sleeve, his body tense, his gaze fixed on the distant tree line. Dusty hesitated. He shouldn't leave Elara alone, not even for a minute. But Rusty's instincts were rarely wrong. "All right," he conceded, his voice strained. "But stay close." They trudged through the deepening snow, the wind whipping at their faces. Rusty led the way, his pace quickening as they neared the trees. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, the silence broken only by the relentless wind and the crunch of their boots on the snow. Then Dusty saw it, a faint set of tracks leading away from the ranch, almost completely obscured by the drifting snow. They were small, delicate tracks, likely made by a woman's boots. Elara? Had she wandered out in the storm before he'd found her? It seemed impossible given her condition. Rusty whined, pawing at the ground, urging him forward. Dusty followed the tracks for a short distance, his heart pounding. The wind howled louder, the snow fell harder, and a sense of unease settled over him. This wasn't right. He stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He couldn't risk going any further. Not without knowing what he was heading into. Not with Elara alone back at the ranch. He turned back, Rusty reluctantly following, his gaze lingering on the disappearing tracks. As they battled their way back to the cabin, Dusty couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. High on the ridge overlooking the double-bar ranch, nestled amongst the jagged peaks and wind-scoured pines, a figure stood silhouetted against the gray sky. Jedstone, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat, watched the ranch house below. A pair of binoculars were fixed to his eyes, his gaze intense. He lowered the binoculars, a cold smile twisting his lips. The game had begun, and he intended to win. A familiar tune. The wind howled a mournful dirge, rattling the windows of the cabin like skeletal fingers. Dusty, restless and unable to shake the unease that had settled in his gut, stoked the fire, sending a shower of sparks dancing up the chimney. Elara sat near the hearth, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket, her gaze fixed on the flames. She seemed lost in thought, a delicate frown creasing her brow. Suddenly, a soft, melodic hum drifted from her lips. It was a simple tune, almost childlike in its purity, yet it resonated with a strange familiarity that tugged at Dusty's heart. He paused, his hand hovering over a fresh log. He knew that melody. He hadn't heard it in years. Not since his mother. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow, a sun-drenched porch, his mother humming as she tended her rose bushes, the scent of lavender hanging heavy in the air. The same melody, note for note. "Elara," he said. his voice barely a whisper above the wind's fury. That tune, where did you learn it? She started, her eyes widening slightly. I don't know, she stammered, her voice raspy from disuse. It just came to me. I'm not sure where I heard it before. He stared at her, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside him, disbelief, hope, and a cautious sense of wonder. He couldn't dismiss it as mere coincidence. The odds were too astronomical. His mother's music hadn't been widely known. She rarely played for anyone outside the family. He rose, his movements stiff, and walked to the far corner of the cabin, where a battered wooden chest sat gathering dust. He hadn't opened it in years, not since his father had passed. Inside, nestled amongst old photographs and forgotten trinkets, was a small, intricately carved music box. He lifted it carefully, his fingers tracing the faded floral patterns on its surface. He wound the key, and a delicate, tinkling melody filled the cabin, clear and bright despite the storm raging outside. It was the same tune. Elara gasped, her eyes fixed on the music box as if she were seeing a ghost. Her breath hitched in her throat and her hands trembled. Dusty watched her, his heart pounding in his chest. Do you recognize it? He asked, his voice hoarse. She didn't answer, her gaze distant, unfocused. Then, slowly, her eyes began to clear, a flicker of recognition dawning in their depths. The roses, she whispered, her voice barely audible. A porch, sunshine, her brow furrowed as if she were struggling to grasp a fleeting image. Lavender, the scent of lavender, she clutched her head, her face contorted in pain. It's all so blurry. Like looking through frosted glass. Dusty rushed to her side, kneeling beside her and gently taking her hand. Easy, he said softly. Don't force it. Just let it come. She squeezed his hand tightly, her knuckles white. There was a woman. She was singing. She smelled of lavender, her voice trailed off and her eyes fluttered closed. He held his breath, waiting, watching. Then her eyes snapped open and she looked at him, her gaze clear and intense. Dusty, she said, her voice stronger now, filled with a newfound clarity. My name is Elara Rivers. I'm your wife. The music box continued to play its gentle tune, oblivious to the revelation it had just unveiled as Rusty whined from the door, a strange restlessness in his eyes. He pawed at the door and gave Dusty a look that conveyed the urgent need to go back out into the blizzard. Dusty knew what he had to do. I will be right back, Dusty told Elara. He trusted Rusty, and he knew that the dog would not be so insistent without cause. He bundled up and headed back out into the blizzard. He would follow the dog and he would find out why it was so important for him to be out there. The promised bride. The fire snapped and popped, radiating a welcome heat that pushed back the lingering cold clinging to Elara's bones. Lost in the flickering light, she felt the worn leather of Dusty's armchair, a small comfort against the tempestuous night. The faint echo of the music box still resonated within her, a fragile link to a past that felt both distant and suffocatingly near. Dusty, she began, the word a breath against the wind's fury. There was an agreement. Dusty, meticulously cleaning his rifle by the fire, stilled his hands, his gaze softening as it met hers. An agreement? Elara nodded, a troubled line etching itself between her eyes. Long ago. Before the storm, before I lost myself. My father, he made one. On my behalf? The details remained hazy like fractured reflections in a frozen pond, yet a single image stood out in sharp relief, her father's granite face, a mask of unwavering purpose as he spoke of alliances and duty. He betrothed me to a rancher. The word tasted like ash. A rancher named Dusty. The rifle clattered to the floor, abandoned by suddenly numb fingers. Dusty stared, his face a canvas of disbelief slowly painted over with understanding. Elara, what are you saying? I was meant to marry you, she confessed, the memories gathering momentum now, a torrent breaking through a dam. A man I'd never laid eyes on. To solidify my family's position, to satisfy a bargain struck before I had any voice in the matter. A queasy wave rolled over her as the memory of suffocating expectations surfaced. She recalled the gilded prison of her upbringing, the endless refining of manners and skills, all geared toward a destiny she rejected. I couldn't, she whispered, tears brimming. I couldn't marry a stranger. I fled. The images intensified, snapping into focus like glass. Secret rendezvous with her trusted maid, hushed plans made in the shadows, the furtive packing of a small bag. The stolen ride on the stagecoach, the desperate yearning for a new existence, a life defined by her own choices. I ran away, she repeated, her voice thick with unshed tears. I boarded a stage heading west. I didn't care where, as long as it was away from the life that awaited me. The blizzard. she gasped, clutching her chest. We were caught in the blizzard. The stage overturned. After that, it's fragments. Only the cold remains. An unrelenting, piercing cold. Dusty knelt beside her, enclosing her hands in his. His calloused grip was a solid anchor in the present. Alara, it's all right. You're safe. You're here. But the dread persisted, a cold premonition refusing to dissipate. She'd fled a predetermined future, seeking autonomy and self-determination. Yet fate, in the guise of a blizzard, had delivered her directly to the very man she had sought to escape. A soft whine sounded from the doorway. Rusty stood there, tail tucked low, his gaze fixed on the swirling snow visible beyond the threshold. He nudged the door further ajar, an obvious invitation. Dusty frowned. What is it, boy? He rose and went to the door, peering out into the white chaos. He could discern nothing through the relentless downpour. He's agitated, he muttered, more to himself than to Alara. Something's bothering him. He grabbed his heavy coat from the hook, shrugging it on. I need to see what's got him so worked up. Dusty, no, Alara cried, scrambling to her feet. It's too dangerous. You can't go out there. I have to, Alara, he said, his voice firm yet laced with concern. Rusty doesn't usually act this way. Something's amiss. He held her gaze, his eyes reflecting a resolve that brooked no argument. I won't be long. Just need to check things out. He stepped into the storm, Rusty surging forward, his dark silhouette quickly swallowed by the swirling white maelstrom. Alara watched him disappear, a knot of fear twisting in her gut. She had unlocked the memories of her past, but the future remained veiled in uncertainty, as treacherous and unpredictable as the blizzard raging outside. A love forged in winter. The fire popped, scattering fiery motes that pirouette like agitated sprites. Dusty sat on the hearth's edge, eyes glued to the flickering display, though his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. Alara observed him, a turmoil of feelings churning within her. Guilt grappled with a nascent, something undefinable, a comforting ember that glowed despite the tempest outside and the hidden truths she still harbored. Rusty whimpered, nudging Dusty's hand with a cold, wet nose, then pawed at the door, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. The dog's unease was palpable, a sharp contrast to the gentle understanding that had blossomed between them only moments before. Dusty exhaled heavily, raking fingers through his already tousled hair. He's agitated, he rasped. Something's rattled him. He wants you to go out there, doesn't he? Alara murmured, her gaze tracing the worry lines fanning from Dusty's eyes. He nodded, grim. I can't dismiss it, Alara. His instincts are rarely wrong. A chill snaked up her spine, as keen and biting as the blizzard's breath. Dusty, no. It's too perilous. You can't simply venture into that whiteout. He turned, his eyes holding a sincerity that stole her breath. I must, Alara. But I won't leave you exposed. I'll secure the door and I won't stray far. Just enough to discern what's upsetting Rusty so. He rose, shrugging into his thick coat. As he reached for his gloves, his hand stilled, his eyes holding hers. Alara, he said, his voice a low murmur, I get it. What you shared about the arranged marriage, about your fear. I would never coerce you into something unwanted. The words lingered, a soothing balm on her wounded spirit. He understood. He wasn't some overbearing figure demanding fealty and ownership. He saw her trepidation, acknowledged it, and honored it. As Dusty moved towards the portal, Alara surged forward, desperate to prevent him not merely from the storm, but from some unseen menace she couldn't name. She reached out, her fingers closing over his on the doorknob. Dusty, she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. Be safe. He squeezed her hand, a reassuring gesture that sent a shiver of warmth through her. I will, he pledged. I always am. Then he vanished, swallowed by the swirling, opaque curtain. The door thudded shut, leaving Alara alone with the blaze and the gnawing fear in her gut. She roamed the cabin, her anxiety escalating with each howling gust that shook the panes. She sought distraction, straightening the already tidy space, replenishing the firewood stack, but her thoughts kept circling back to Dusty, battling the elements, trailing Rusty into the unknown. And then it dawned on her. A revelation so profound, so unexpected that it rooted her to the spot. She was in love with him. Not some idealized version, not out of obligation, but with the man himself. The gentle, strong, and honorable man who had rescued her, who had treated her with respect and kindness, who understood her anxieties and passed no judgment. She loved the crinkles that framed his eyes when he smiled, the scent of pine and leather that clung to him, the quiet fortitude in his hands. She loved his steadfast devotion to Rusty, his connection to the wilderness, his intrinsic goodness. She loved him. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. It was a risk, a plunge into uncharted waters, but also the most authentic sentiment she had ever known. Time warped each heartbeat an age. Finally, she registered the scrape of the door, and Dusty lurched in, shedding snow like a bear emerging from its den. Rusty bounded in after him, tail thrashing wildly. What was it? Elara questioned, rushing to his side, her hands hovering over his coat, searching for any sign of injury. He captured her hands in his gaze sweeping her face. Nothing, he replied, a note of perplexity in his tone. Rusty just led me to the property line, then pivoted and came back. I can't explain it. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and discerned something in her gaze that made his pulse quicken. Something tender, vulnerable, and brimming with a love that mirrored his own. The blizzard roared outside, but inside the cabin, a different kind of tempest was brewing. A maelstrom of emotions, of unspoken yearnings, of a love that had been lost and unearthed, tested and fortified. The following morning, the storm had dispersed, leaving a world transformed into a pristine, shimmering expanse. The sun ascended, bathing the snow-laden landscape in shades of rose and gold. Elara and Dusty stood hand in hand on the porch, watching the sunrise. Rusty settled contentedly at their feet. The air was sharp and pure, imbued with the hope of a fresh start. The secrets of the past still lingered, the perils still threatened, but in that instant they were eclipsed. Only the present mattered, the love they shared, and the future they would confront together. A future forged in the depths of winter, as resilient and enduring as the land itself.